All right. Hello, hello, and welcome everyone to another Cosmic Tea Time. Today we are going to talk all things Saturn, and Saturn recently moved into Pisces, and I want to dive into what the heck that means. And we're also going to talk a little bit about this topic of Saturn return as well. So, if you don't already know, my name is Kaitlyn. I am a psychic moon mentor, and I work with spiritual entrepreneurs to help them make money doing what they love. And tonight I'm joined by Kat. Kat, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I am Kat Mason, and I'm an astrologer and also a garden witch. I do a lot of just combining intuitive practice with working with plants. And I love to make connections between plant care and specifically self care, just so that the way we take care of nature really reflects the way we take care of ourselves, basically.
Yeah, it does, and it's interesting. I saw some of your posts too about that, like, oh, your sun is like how much sunlight you need. I was like, ooh, I like that. I'm a Leo, and like being in the sun, like, it really does. Like, I mean, it boosts everyone's mood, but like, I really like love it. It's so nurturing when I do that.
Yes, it really is.
Beautiful. So I've chatted a little bit about how Saturn recently moved into Pisces on the same day as our super full moon in Virgo last week on the 7th. So, can you tell us a little bit more about what that means? Maybe what Saturn can represent for us? Maybe we'll start.
Yes. And just before we do that, I just want to make sure that I'm sharing the live stream to
Perfect.
Facebook. Are we um I'm not sure if I went to the event and I'm not sure if
No
I'm
worries.
looking in
Yeah,
the
let's check.
if I'm looking in the wrong spot. Um if you could locate that, I'll just like start talking about it. Um
Perfect. I have it on my end, and then I can always,
yeah, like
yeah,
if you could tag me, then I can like share it to my page.
perfect.
Um, okay, um, so we just recently got out of Saturn in Aquarius, and um, Saturn transits in general are 3 years, and give or take, it's around this time period, but it's essentially a really pivotal time for not only a person on a personal level, but it's also a collective transit. Um, so it's very much tied to the whole concept that we talk about in astrology related to the Saturn return. And it's funny because every single planet has a return, right? We have a lunar return, we have a solar return, Mercury return, all these things. However, um, having a Saturn return is extra important because Saturn is the planet that rules maturity. It rules our ability to basically move forward in life and become a newer, more advanced, and again, matured version of ourselves. So there are a few pieces here. So number one, just having a Saturn return in general, it's like a 3 year process. It's a time period where we're kind of going over some of the major lessons in our lives. It's very much a time when we are faced with the immature parts of ourselves and the kind of immature situations even that we're in, and we're very much put through this kind of trial period over 3 years, and 3 years can seem like a long time, and yet at the same time it's like it's a blip when you think of the larger span of our lives, right?
I
So
can definitely agree with that as I've just exited my Saturn return and like in it, it's like, when is this gonna end? This feels so hard. Why does everything feel so hard? Oh my gosh, yeah.
yeah, and it's not to be harsh, but it is meant to be hard. And the reason for that, one of the analogies that I like to use is working with clay. in order to, if you have like a block of clay, in order to shape it into something, it's going to have to be cut. It's going to have to be, you have to apply pressure at different parts. You're going to have to mold it. You're going to have to really work with it. And there's a lot of effort, like this physical effort that goes into shaping a piece of clay. And the same is true of just us as people. There's a lot of pressure and discipline, and it takes time as well to work with ourselves. So it's a really, really pivotal time. Um, so that's very much like just Saturn transits and Saturn return. And Saturn returns are when we have our personal trial, and it's related to the sign that Saturn's in, but it's also related to the house. And then, of course, kind of the last little detail is if there are any other planets that are really next to our Saturn or aspecting our Saturn. But in general, that can be a very personal time of maturity that we go through. And those lessons that we're put through, the trials that we're put through, can be harsh, and they're meant to be, because they're supposed to shape us and for our betterment, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a time when a lot of major decisions can sort of come up, right? Saturn comes up about, and like your Saturn return comes through about every 30 years or so, right? And so for me, I've been like 29 through like 31, right? And for me, I had my first baby, I had my second baby, I moved states twice in the United States.
Oh, wow.
And then I worked a lot on my business, and like in that time it was like, no, like I have to, like, even though I was a new mom, like it was still really, really important to me to be an entrepreneur and show up in something that I love, because I knew it would make me like a better mom as
Mm.
well. So I had, yeah, lots of things going on in the past 3 years during my Saturn return, consequently as well.
That's wild to me, because I was asking you before what your rising sign was, and um, I was thinking to myself that your Saturn is in Aquarius. That was probably near your fourth house, or I'm not sure if it's actually in your fourth house or if it's just kind of around there.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's be fun to check later, but it sounds to me that you probably have Saturn in your fourth house, and fourth house of rules, family, home, motherhood, and just like the responsibility of all that. And what's really interesting to me is like you said that like all these things, it was almost like things piling up on top of each other and needing to learn how to carry the weight, which is so fascinating to me, because Saturn it's an Earth planet, and it's a planet associated with burden. And not to say that like all burdens are bad, but burdens, they come with a responsibility. It's kind of like, this is a weird analogy, but when you have a lot of groceries to carry into the house, and you're like you're not going to carry it all in one arm, right? You're going to be a little bit more strategic, like, okay, I'm going to carry them in both arm or both hands, and this is how many bags I can take. And sometimes we're like, okay, I'm just going to do this in one trip and take all the bags.
Exactly. One trip, I can do this.
I
Oh, and
can
you try
do
to
this.
power through it.
That is a Saturn return, basically, like taking all the bags.
I think that's a good analogy, actually.
Yeah.
Oh my god, that's so perfect. Yeah, yeah, it's wild. I think you're right, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. I think my Saturn is in my fourth house. And I'm curious too, anyone here catching the live or catching the replay, like if you know your placement, drop it in the comments, and Kat and I will come back and chat with you. Would be so curious to know. Or if you know any of your other placements as well, your sun, moon, and or rising, please share those with us in the chat. But yeah, I think it is in the fourth house, because when I was diving into it just within the last few months, it, I don't know, somehow came up in YouTube randomly.
Mm-hmm.
Randomly, right? I always see those as synchronicities. But yeah, I was like, holy crap, yep, that makes total sense. Of course it was in my fourth house. This is exactly what I've been in. But tell us a little bit about how we can incorporate that, and now Saturn being in Pisces. What exactly does that mean?
Okay, so I feel as if, okay, I just want to touch on Saturn and Aquarius first, only because they're related and because there's a sequence through which, Saturn is moving through all of these signs. And one of the things to really consider when Saturn is moving into a new sign is like what it is really understanding the lessons that came before, because they're going to help to make more sense of the transit that we're going into. So, just as a quick kind of recap, Saturn and Aquarius had so much to do with finding our people and finding our personal roles and our place in society. I think there was a lot of especially the past 3 years. Um, my goodness, like we had COVID hit, we had that Saturn, um, we had the Saturn Pluto in Capricorn, and then Saturn moved into Aquarius, and it was like, especially after COVID, I think a lot of people were rethinking their role in society. Like, where do I belong? Where are my people? Like, there was this natural draw to finding our place with others. And what's really powerful about that is that it gave us something to really fight for and to also be engaged in. Because I think there was a lot of complacency in the world previous to that. And then all of a sudden we were considering the broader, our broader place in the world. And now that we've moved through that energy, I think that we've more or less moved through that feeling of, okay, I need to find my people. I need to feel a sense of belonging. And now that I think, not to say that everybody's like settled in perfectly where they want to be, but at this point, now that we've moved into Saturn and Pisces, what's really powerful in this energy is the fact that, okay, if I want to see a better world, there are changes personally that I need to make. There are changes that I need to make in terms of things that I'm very attached to, because Pisces is a sign of detachment. And it's also the sign related to illusion, delusion, addictions, and the subconscious as a whole. So this is where, like, this is going to be a really scary transit. And I don't mean that in like doom and gloom on a collective front. I mean that in like a personal sense, because a lot of what people and all of us are facing this. A lot what we're having to face at this time is the personal barriers that we have to our own growth. Um, and that can be so intimidating, because it's one thing, like when Saturn was in Aquarius, we were all looking outside of ourselves, which it made sense at the time. It was like, what are our governments doing? What is our community doing? What are these people online doing that I don't like or whatever? We were very focused on community. But when you take away all of that, what we're left with is like, what are my behaviors? What are my unhealthy attachments, my addictions? What are my habits? And so, and I know like you do this inner work in your work. So actually, businesses and entrepreneurs and just people in counseling, people who literally bring stability to mental health, spiritual health, emotional health. There's going to be a huge need for you. I think we all, because I'm in that industry too.
Yeah, you're in there
I'm
too,
in there
definitely.
too. We're
You're in there
all
too, and that's one reason I'm like so excited for this transit and like to see what sort of develops, because like even during COVID last year is like, you know what? I hope the one good thing that comes out of this, or hopefully there's multiple, but the one good thing that comes out of this is the importance of mental health and like community and the factors that sort of impact that. And even here in Pisces, right? It's like, okay, there are certain things I can do for myself to better myself, to shift my mindset, to become healthier. And there are so many ways you can go about doing that, whether it's spiritual, whether it's like artistic and like creative. It doesn't have to be what I think some people for so long thought it was, at least in the Western culture, right? Of like, well, I have to go to my doctor, or I can't afford my doctor, or different things. And so, I mean, I talk with a lot of people like yourself and spiritual entrepreneurs and people who you were mentioning, right? Like counseling or like trauma therapy and these different creative outlets, but that are also of service and that do focus on the self and how hopefully I'm excited to see more people step out into that and into that place of service. One, because they know it works, but also because they really do want the best for other individuals. And I mean, I know this from my journey thus far is like when we do that and we let other people shine their light too. And we can all do that in a sort of unique fashion. And like to me, that's one of my favorite things about what I do.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that the people who are most authentic in that service to community, to the work they do, um, are gonna become the pillars upon which like those there are new values that are going to need to be built because there was a lot that I think got revealed about mental health in our society and like especially in the workplace and just our values around like what mental health issues we are maybe not addressing, not looking at all that stuff. So now we're in a position where we can really say to ourselves and to the people around us like we're going to develop better tools um to be able to address these things and to actually heal it. And I think what's so interesting is that one thing that is going to be, I think, nipped in the bud, as they say, is anybody who is marketing themselves as wanting to help but doesn't actually have true intentions to help. And they're doing it for just not the best reasons, right? Saturn has a tendency to out things related to the sign, and I think that is something that is going to be pruned off, just to use some garden analogy there, is just people who don't have great intentions. I think that it's going to be much harder for that to go under the radar. I think a lot of that is just going to be exposed, which is really great.
Which is so great. And I think, I mean, I always connect Pisces as a more in tuned spiritual sign as well. And for me, with spirituality, with intuition, with being an empath, being a highly sensitive person, like I see all of these things as connected. And when you're sort of in that sphere, so much of it is a feeling, right? And we can feel energy. You can feel if somebody's sort of upset or if you just walked into a room where an argument took place. Like you can sort of feel these things. And that's sort of what I'm hearing you say now, right? Is like, it's going to come out, right? People are going to feel it or just sort of know. And somehow it's going to be expressed that, no, that there's something out of alignment there.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think also spiritual bypassing is gonna kind of come up as well because I think there have been some just like toxic narratives in spiritual communities that aren't actually helpful, but they were very much kind of blended in with some good practices. So it was all sort of a bit of a mess. And I think the nice thing about Saturn is that Saturn comes in and not restructures, but builds a structure on in those things. And I feel like the spiritual community, especially online, has been wonderful, but also just very mixed. Just been so much blending, and it's hard to know who is really authentic, who really means the best for you, and who doesn't. And so with Saturn coming in Pisces, it's going to create structures that keep people safer, essentially, in community. And I think that's a wonderful thing because it's going to bring structure to entrepreneurs as well in their own communities, which are going to become like even more safe havens, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like I said, I'm just excited to see what you're saying sort of develop. That's exactly like my vibe and what I want to help create in this world, really.
Yes, amazing. Um, Another thing that I kind of wanted to bring up which I feel like is super relevant to this Saturn and Pisces stuff, is the stuff around the subconscious. So the aspects of ourselves that we're not always looking at all the time, addictions, and just like the ways in which we might have tried to cope with certain situations, which is not something to shame ourselves on. And this was actually a key thing when I was researching about Saturn and Pisces and just getting my own kind of intuitions about it, is that there's this tendency to shame ourselves for the coping strategies we've had in the past, the addictions we've had, the bad behaviors, all these things. And that moving forward and really becoming more stable in ourselves requires this like radical self-compassion mixed with also the radical removal of what isn't actually serving us. So it's kind of like being able to look at our bad behaviors, our addictions, the unhelpful and harmful things that we do in our everyday life, or in our relationships, or whatever that looks like. Being able to recognize those things and have self-awareness, but then also not punish ourselves for that same thing, which is really, really
Yeah.
tricky to do.
And it can be really like challenging to be that honest with yourself and to create that self-awareness. I mean, like I do some of this work, and the work that I do with people is to really dive into the depths of their soul and figure out, okay, what is this energetic block that's keeping me from doing that thing I'm curious about, doing that thing that I think I would love, but I don't know, it's hard to put words around, right? And so in sessions with people, I dive in and we go there, and it can really be how we respond, right? Like you were saying, like, well, how do you respond to certain people or conversations, or how are you coping, right? You were talking about, right? When you're upset or like irritated, where do you run? Do you notice sort of a habit that you have? And it can be really helpful, and hopefully we'll start to see this, what we were just talking about, right? How perhaps spirituality and personal spiritual practices can help us create an awareness around these things and how we're responding. At least for me in my line of work, that's sort of my goal with people. Like, let's work on that awareness muscle. Let's work on that intuitive muscle, which I really see as the same thing, right? Can we hone in on these practices that help us get quiet, sit down, settle down, and practice our focus and where our focus is going, and also like noticing if there's a pattern for how we get distracted, right? That monkey mind. Is there a pattern there? Most likely, because our body, our whole system, our mind, like it loves homeostasis, it loves the familiar, so most likely. But what is that? And can we get curious? And like you said, can we be compassionate with ourselves, which can also be very challenging. I know it has been for me on my journey, right? And so leaning more into some of the divine feminine practices, right, of sort of nurturing and letting myself feel fully into the feels, and being a little bit more gentle. Like it's kind of challenging when you're not used to like operating in that way. Even something as simple as like letting yourself rest when you're tired, or like
Yes.
saying no, right? The 2-letter word that feels so hard to say, meaningless to say, like no, and letting that be enough, letting that be it. No, I'm not going to do that.
Oh my God, it's so true. And I love this discussion about spiritual practice, because kind of leads into this idea that came to me about like having a devotional practice when it comes to ourselves and our own lives. Um, and that a lot of the healthy structures, having discipline, um, building habits, all of these things that are very like Saturnian in nature, that I think that we naturally kind of push against, because I think just as humans, we are wanting comfort. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just an evolutionary part of us, is that we're always seeking comfort. We're always seeking kind of that path of least resistance, if you will. Where can I avoid the pain, right? And so when it comes to establishing like different habits, healthy habits, especially having a routine, choosing healthier outlets for coping mechanisms rather than unhealthy ones, all of that takes, like, it does take discipline, it does take showing up and willpower, and all these little things does take having a plan and honoring that plan. And rather than that being this like oppressive kind of jail guard on your writing your ass about it, um, shifting our perspective about what it means to really have habits is huge for Saturn and Pisces, because the illusion in us is to say things like, this is restrictive, I'm not allowed to be who I am, I can't just like go with the flow or whatever. But sometimes the flow is chaos, it's like masked chaos that keeps us in the same loop of, I just want to do what's easy and what I've already been doing. And it's interesting because we're being asked to level up those things that make us feel better, because the things that we maybe, the coping mechanisms we took up when we were responding to trauma to survive are going to be different than the responses of building a healthier life where we want to thrive, right? So, but making that switch, taking on better health habits, this is like it's a devotional practice for oneself. It's a spiritual practice. It's kind of like, and I'm not a religious person, but I am very spiritual. It's kind of like people who go to church every single Sunday. That is a practice. They go to a place where they can devote themselves spiritually in a way. And the more that we can take on that kind of structure, if you will, when it comes to our health routines, and just being happier, healthy people, I think that that's like one of the best ways that we can approach Saturn and Pisces.
Yeah, I think so. And even, for a lot of us, at least individuals in my community that I've talked with, right, even if we did have some things that might seem like healthy disciplines of showing up and working out and, working hard to have your business thrive, right, if there's some of that self-talk that's almost like self-deprecating, or like you said earlier, like shaming, like, oh, why did I do that? Like, I can do better, I can do it harder, and like trying to like push yourself, but almost like in a negative, like self-talk language.
Yes.
It's like, well, okay, maybe that worked to a certain extent. Maybe it did work in the past. And like, okay, is that how you want to operate? Is there another way? And I don't know. I always love getting curious and asking these open-ended questions to my clients and to myself too. I do this work regularly to sort of, lift the veil on these things so we can hopefully, like I'm hearing you say, step into this era of self-love really
Yes.
in a new way. And like, I do love me and I deserve to feel good. And how can I love myself, and how can that self-discipline be an act of self-love?
Yes. Yes. Because I think that we have such a, I think especially in Western culture, we're taught that, we have a lot of destructive behaviors that are seen as like very tempting. And I'm not saying that we, should never do those things, but I think that when we're opting for destructive behaviors in, and there's just no balance, then we're not really healing, we're not really resting, we're not really, it's kind of like that thing where they say, if you're sitting there scrolling through your phone, that may not be actually restful, um, especially depending on like what content you're consuming, right? Especially if it's stressing you out or it's leaving you like in a emotionally worse space than it was before you started. But it can feel like it's familiar, it's a habit that we already have, it's something that we already do. So we may opt for that as opposed to sitting down and deep breathing, which can feel like, especially as a new habit, or it's not something that we've incorporated into our life, it can, yes, that can feel just strange and unfamiliar. And there's so many ways in which we do that, right? And it's a form of self-sabotage that we don't necessarily recognize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes it's those little things of like yeah, like on social media scrolling or Netflix, like, but is that really restful? Like, is your brain able to really rest? What if you did yoga nidra instead? Or what if you meditated? Or what if you just lied down and like closed your eyes for a minute, um, and it's funny how resistant, yeah, we can sort of be to those things. And sometimes, like you said, it's just because it's different in our bodies. Like, wait a second, you don't usually do this. What are you doing?
Yes, and it's I think what's so it was going to be really interesting about approaching this, and the way that I personally, because like I notice for myself, I respond, and I think most people do, frankly. Like I am not better off like shaming myself for wanting Netflix, right? But I think where the structure and like the Saturn part can be so useful here is, for instance, in like if I'm stressed, instead of like running to Netflix, having more structure around those particular habits. So letting myself have Netflix or letting myself scroll my phone, but doing it at like planned times or times within like, yeah, like for instance, for me, my weekends, like I have structure during the week, but the weekends, like I let myself completely let go of my routine. That is my way of not feeling personally, um, like, so I don't rebel against myself or rebel against my own routines, basically. So that's a period of time in which I have zero shame around like I could binge watch Netflix on the weekend, and that's okay because that's the time that I've allotted myself the space to do that. Whereas I know that if I was binging 5 hours of Netflix on a Wednesday during the day when I know that I have these other things to get done that I know are for my best, that of course I'm not going to feel good, right? But yeah, it's again like that balance.
Yeah, I love that. And I've had to do that for myself, even working online in the online space. Like, okay, I'm going to respond to messages like from 12 to 12:30, right? That way I make sure I do it, but also it's not too overwhelming and I'm not getting into my family time, right? So that's just one example. But also, I really love the idea, and I just love how synchronistic this is because I'm in the middle of launching Own Mastermind, which is like helping
Yes.
balance all these things that we've been talking about. Like, yes, like I didn't even realize it, right? Like I haven't studied astrology, right? I'm a moonologist, but I'm like, damn, okay,
You're
this
on
is my
point.
spirit at this time. Like, thank you. Okay, I trust you. Thank you so much. But yes, or even having that structure and prioritizing that self-care first, right? Okay, like you said, I'm not going to shame myself. Okay, I want to watch Netflix. Okay, anyone else out there watch The Perfect Match? I just watched that with my husband. Like, going through that little guilty pleasure here. But prioritizing, right? Did I work out today? Did I meditate today? Did I journal for 5 minutes today? Right? These things don't have to take a lot of time, but did I do that first because it's going to make me feel so much better? And then honestly, you might be pleasantly surprised that those other cravings sort of go away, right? To sort of
Mm.
scroll or binge on Netflix or whatever, but maybe not. But yeah, I love what you're talking about. Having the structure around these things.
Yeah, and it's like what's so ironic is that I think that, let's say, yeah, you do those things, you do your journaling, you do your workout or whatever it is that you want to make sure you have done first. When you get to sit down and binge watch or whatever that looks like, you actually enjoy it more, which is so funny. Like it creates presence with the very things. Like I feel like um, it creates a different relationship with those things. So they're not something that you're avoiding responsibility with. They're not, because I know that for myself. Like if I'm the times in the past, there have been many where I have avoided my work or responsibilities or people, like things that people have to get back to or whatever. I end up using distraction type activities. I'm not even present with the activity. I'm in that state of like just wanting to be distracted. So I'm not actually feeling good in it. And having that awareness really changes things. So now when I have intentional sit down with Netflix, I'm paying attention to the story. I'm getting more from it. I'm enjoying my time. I'm enjoying my body more rather than being like racked in guilt and shame and all of these like negative emotions. So it's just so interesting how that shifts, right?
It is, yeah, and the other patterns it's attached to, right? Like I'm hearing you talking like, yep, I'm familiar with that pattern too. And this pattern of like that procrastination, right? Of and the self-talk that can come from it of, oh, I work well under pressure, and you're sort of like waiting until it's like, oh no, that's due like tomorrow. Okay, no, I can get it done, right?
Oh my
It's like
God.
there's so many negatives that come along with that too. But yeah, what other patterns it's sort of attached to, and how you can really slowly see so many different areas of your life change by these really simple daily things,
Yes.
simple daily practices.
It's so true. It's life changing really to approach these things differently because, and this is the Pisces part of Saturn and Pisces. Pisces rules everything that we cannot see in ourselves. So these are all the things that are operating below the surface of our subconscious, and they're actually directing our lives so much more than we realize. Like it's kind of like the puppeteer, and it is still us. It's like an aspect of us, right? But it's operating from the shadows essentially, and it's kind of like pulling the strings about when it comes to our decisions, and we just live our life so differently when we are able to really look at what's going on beneath the surface without fear. Well, maybe the fear is there still, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and there are luckily so many ways that we can access that information, and we can start to witness sort of what's there, beneath the surface and feel into that energy. But I want to make sure that people know where to follow you and know what you're all about and how to work with you. But is there anything else you want to share before we share how
Um,
we think?
I think I think the last thing I want to mention is just like something I've been talking about, which is really fixing the soil in our lives. So this is just like the concept I've kind of come around to expressing is that like the soil in our lives is basically like our physical environment, our the it does include the like daily patterns and things, but also like the people that we have in our lives, the information we're consuming, just like everything that kind of like shapes our physical world and has an impact on our internal world. And the more that we can really kind of clean up the landscape of our lives, the more that we are going to personally be able to grow, because I firmly believe that like we can have the best intentions to have healthy habits in our life, but if everything in our environment is constantly working against us building that habit, it's like it's going to be impossible to grow it, right? So that's something I really encourage people to look at. It's not to say that you have to like kick everybody out and
And at
move.
once, yeah.
Yeah, it's not something that changes suddenly, but it is something to look at least to see where you can make small meaningful changes that are going to be like positive for you, right? So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like I'm thinking of say environment, and you start to realize, oh wow, I really am sort of impacted by my environment and clutter and certain colors and things. So, you're not going to like redo your whole house or something, like your whole living space. No, maybe you start with creating like a little corner that feels really peaceful or that helps
Yes.
you embody whatever that feeling is that you're after, right? And then slowly, right, you can do that step by step with other spaces that perhaps you spend a lot of time in.
Yes.
But yeah, we're sort of getting away, thankfully, from this like all or nothing mentality and this sort of
Yeah.
like really intense energy.
Which doesn't work anyway, so.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Yeah, thank goodness. Oh, perfect. Yeah. So share with us, where can people find you? How can they work with you?
Okay, so number one, I have my website, so earthmason.com. It's just sort of like where I have all of my offerings, and if there's anything kind of new that I have coming up, I always put it up there. But the other place to follow me is just on Facebook. So my personal My personal profile is also my professional profile, so it's just Kat Mason. You'll see my face, and I pretty much put everything on there. I currently, the only group I have, and this is more related to plant care. So if you do want to learn how to take care of plants, just more strictly on that side of things, it's not really astrology related, but it is, because that's kind of my whole world, is working with
Because you can't help
nature.
it.
I
Yeah,
can't help it.
exactly. And it's
Um,
vibe.
but if you're interested in learning about plant care, I have a group on Facebook called Houseplant Hospital. And I think the last thing is just my tag, Earth Mason, like that title. You can find me on TikTok, Instagram, and those are pretty much the two places that I'm like the most active, aside from Facebook, of course. But yeah, that's it.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing, and thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me
Thank
today. This
you
was
for having
so
me.
fun. Yes. And if anyone is interested in how to work with me, you can follow me on Facebook. I'm also on Instagram, Psychic Moon Mentor, and I have a beautiful Facebook community where we hone into the moon energy and how to work with the moon to manifest and change your life and dive into the subconscious, like we chatted a little bit about today. And my Facebook community is Moon Manifesting Lunar Abundance. And for anyone really eager to sort of dive in and coincidentally talk about more of these topics that we've talked about tonight in a beautiful soul sisterhood community, I encourage you to join Own Mastermind, where it's all about owning your energy and owning your gifts and your sensitivity and your passions and like what you really want to do in the world. And we're really going to balance like this nurturing energy that we've been talking about this evening with spiritual practices and staying curious with what can that look like and reflecting with each other about, well, for me, this looks like, XYZ, because we're allowed to show up in our own unique gifts in our own unique way. And we don't have to be judged for it. We don't have to be put down for it. And Own Mastermind is going to be this beautiful, safe space to do that, as well as implement these very practical steps so you can take these actions to have this beautiful structure, right? We're balancing the divine masculine structure, action planning with the powerful and wild divine feminine that is intuitive and nurturing and so many beautiful things. So I would love to help you hone in on this, own your spiritual practice, and grow your business. A lot of spiritual entrepreneurs are attracted to me. So if there's been something you've been thinking about creating, thinking about doing, really switching gears, making money doing something you love, Own Mastermind is for you. And I would love to see you in there with 10 other beautiful soul sisters.
Yeah,
So you can
sounds amazing.
if you have any questions about that. But otherwise, yeah, thank you, Kat, so much. This was so fun.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I'm so grateful.
Yeah, no worries. So everyone make sure to follow Kat and we will see you again soon. Happy moon manifesting, everyone.